Hello from Oslo, and welcome to today's afternoon tea conversation. I'm Ingeborg, and I am the leader of Women in Global Health Norway. I want you to meet some of our members, especially those that have been appointed to the advisory group of the Women in Global Health Norway. Today, I'm looking forward to having a virtual cup of tea with Signe E Åsberg, a molecular biologist from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about what she's doing. Signe, I'm happy to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Your life seems to be so much defined by your passion for the global challenge of infectious diseases. Could you talk a little bit about the roads you've traveled and how you started out studying cell and molecular biology and how you became interested in global health?
Yeah, sure. So I actually did my master's degree in how plants defend themselves against insects. And it was a lot of fun. And during that period, I got exposed to a lot of different kinds of cell and molecular biology research. And I got very interested in antibiotic resistance. So I decided to follow up on that for my PhD. I did my PhD in molecular medicine here at NTNU, and I studied the interaction between mycobacteria and macrophages during antibiotic therapy. And mycobacteria are the bacteria that cause, for instance, tuberculosis. And so I found the basic research incredibly interesting. But I got more and more frustrated with no matter how much work I did in the lab, you still had this immense global challenge that was hitting so many people. And although I find antibiotic resistance incredibly interesting, a lot of the people who get, for instance, tuberculosis, they get infected with bacteria that are not antibiotic resistant. So that means that there is therapy available, that we can actually cure the disease, but they're still getting sick and there's still 1 million people dying every year. And so that was sort of my portal into global health and how I got interested in that aspect. And so when I was done with my PhD, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And during the last year of my PhD, I came across the world of simulations, like the World Health Assembly simulations and UN simulations. And I was very lucky that my PhD supervisor allowed me to attend the World Health Assembly simulation in Denmark, called the NorWHO. So that I got to spend a whole week like diving into the world of the World Health Organization. And that really fueled my interest into global health.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe elaborate a little bit more about the simulations, the Nordic WGH simulations. That's completely unfamiliar territory for me. How do you, what do you gain from them, really?
Yeah, it's really interesting, but it turns out that there are a lot of simulations across the world, really, of the WHO meetings and the United Nations meetings. And so young people come together and for a period of time, they reenact those actual meetings. And there is, usually there is a theme or a subject, for instance, that the meeting centers around. But then each participant is assigned a role. So most of them are assigned the role of a delegate of a country. And you can also be assigned the role of like supporting industry or pharma or journalist. And then people take the roles very seriously. And then you play out the actual meeting during several days. The one I attended lasted for a whole week. And I was assigned the role of one of like the big pharma companies. And it's so much fun. And you learn so much about how these organizations functions, how the meetings work, how people and the delegate works together and the conflicts that arise. And what's very important is that you get to sort of do ad hoc negotiations, and you have to really like be in character and do your part. And you learn so much just interacting with people, negotiating, and you learn about the organization. So it's super helpful, and you learn so much about what's going on, and you learn a lot of like personal skills like public speaking, negotiations. It's an incredible experience, really.
Yeah. Wow. That reminds me, actually, I have done things like that when I was doing my studies in dinosaur ages, as my children would call it. Signe, you've told me that you're into cloud computing and big data, okay? And your background is so broad. How did you maneuver into that area of the world?
Yeah, I have always sort of followed my interest or what I felt like I needed to learn in that given moment. So after my PhD, I wanted to do more work related to global health, and I felt like it was time to move away from basic research and working at the bench. So I got a job combined as a scientist and research advisor for a group that did research on sepsis. And sepsis is also a huge global health problem. And my goal really was to learn epidemiology and do more of that kind of research. But I found the role as a research advisor incredibly rewarding. And it was really nice to get a break from doing science, honestly, on my own. So I did a lot of more administrative work for the research group. And then I got exposed to the problems of big data and data-driven research in health science. So coming from molecular biology, I had no idea about this. But turns out we have a lot of valuable health data in Norway and really in Europe. And there's a big hassle of getting access to the data. How do you handle the data? How do you work with the data? How do you keep it secure? How do you stay compliant? And there is so much really to deal with. And I found this on one part is very interesting on its own. It's also, I think, going to be a very limiting factor for digital health, and especially for global health moving forward. And I found just the problem for a scientist of how to adequately handle their data when the data is that big and that complex to be very interesting. And so again, I got the opportunity to dive into what I was interested in and start working for Hunt Cloud, which is a cloud computing service for scientists. So that's what I'm working with now.
Oh yeah. Did you find any solutions, or have you solved any of your puzzles yet?
Well, these are incredibly complex problems, and what we see is that a lot of the time people tend to think of this as an IT problem. And in fact, it's really a scientific and a health problem. And dealing with data is so much more than having a good hardware solution. It's a lot more into having the right agreements, the right structures, the right infrastructure. And most of all, it's about maintaining trust with the people who donate their or lend their data, and trust like in the whole chain, from the people giving away their data to people working with it to the people basing their decisions on that data. So it's a lot more about trust management, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a complex area to maneuver within for both young and fresh researchers and students and more sophisticated researchers, actually.
Yeah, it is very complex, and what's so fascinating and cool about it is that we don't even really have the methods, the scientific methods, to use all of that data. And the border between what is health data and what is not health data is also unclear. So you also want to take in a lot more data, especially we can't even predict now what kind of data we'll need in the future. And what's so important then is that you're able to collaborate across fields. So you need to collaborate across scientific fields, across country borders, and across generations of scientists. And I think especially now, we need to be very clear that the data collection is important and the quality needs to be high, but we need to take care of the people donating their data. And I think there's a real challenge here in global health that, for instance, low and middle income countries or the residents there might not be able to control their data in the same way that we do here, or will not be given the same opportunity, for instance. And how we use that data needs also to be trustworthy, regardless of who gave it.
Yeah, exactly. That relates it to global health perfectly, right? Yeah, so do you think you will ever go back to being a pure molecular biologist again, a scientific researcher?
I don't think so. No. No, I feel like I have a lot of passion, or I want to give a lot. I feel like I have a lot to give, but I don't feel like the best use of my time is at the bench. And I cannot stop thinking about the broader picture, and that makes it really hard to focus on that one little petri dish.
Yes, right.
That said, I really admire the people who do that kind of work. And I mean, basic science is still incredibly fascinating to me and interesting. Just realize it's not where I want to be.
Exactly. So having to wrap up a little bit, do you have any advice or words of wisdom to young women? Maybe something you wish that you were told when you started your professional life?
Yeah, I really wish someone would have told me that it's completely okay to not have a grand plan and to not follow titles. It's okay to just follow what you want to learn, follow your passion, because the future that you're educating yourself for, or when you just start off working, it's going to be so different in 10, 20, 30 years that the job you're going to end up with might not even exist yet. So it's perfectly fine to not like aim for a title or for a specific field. Just pick out what you're interested in and what you want to learn. I think especially follow up, what do I want to learn right now, is like a good thing to navigate.
Well, I wish somebody had been so clear when I was young. I hope there are lots of young people out there listening to you right now. That was really good advice. And Signe, just at the end of our little talk here, why do you think there's a need for a network like ours in our so very equal society here in Norway?
Yeah, well, we might think we're completely equal, then obviously we're not. I mean, that's the one major point. There's still a need for women's networks. There are pay gaps, there are gaps within labor, just what is considered like a typical women job and not, and the differences in pay levels, that's one thing. Then in global health, obviously there's the leadership gap. And I think it's important to have these kinds of networks because they span fields and they span generations. And there is so much that we can learn from each other. So it's so important, especially with like women in global health, that you're able then to collect people from so different backgrounds into one network that you can really help each other out.
Yes. Signe, thanks so much. And thanks for sharing your story and reflections with us today. And I feel very lucky to have you in our advisory group.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, so thanks, and looking forward to working with you more. And thanks to all of our listeners out there for tuning in. And we look forward to welcoming you back to another afternoon tea conversation fairly soon. Goodbye.